What is it like to be followed through the woods by something unseen that tracks your every movement? Your senses heighten, and your heart almost beats out of your chest. You peer into the darkness and see nothing, but you hear it breathing. You hear the leaves crunch under its feet as it crosses the terrain far quicker than you. What must that feel like? Today, we're going to hear from people who could tell you minutely in detail what that feels like. I recently shared some cases where people have been followed or shadowed when they were walking in a place that they knew well. In some cases, they also heard growls or snarls very close to them. And I'd like to share some of my listeners' experiences when they found themselves in that similar position. Our first case takes place between Hemel Hempstead and the Ashbridge estate, just to the north of it. The estate is in an area with several cryptid reports that have been seen by locals and visitors to the forest. The forest itself has a vast history, and it's a place visitors flock to in the daytime. And the walk around the boundary of the estate includes lots of ancient woodlands, some dramatic scenery from all viewpoints. The estate is littered with ancient monuments, the most prominent being the hill fort and Ivanhoe beacon, which once guarded the area against attack. Ashbridge began life as a monastery, founded by Edmund of Cornwall, and he was the nephew of Henry III. In 1283, the house was a holy relic. The monks were known as the bonhommes, which means in French the good man, or some people referred to them as the Blue Friars because of the colour of their robes. During the 13th century, a deer park was established with the ancestors of the fallow deer that still roam the estate today. As you walk across the landscape, look about you for signs of the past. There have been human activity on this site since the Bronze Age. There are several burial mounds that can be found in the area, scattered amongst the 5,000 acres of woodland. Our witness Al was local to the area and has experienced some strange activity over the years. He said, "Hi Deb, I thought I'd tell you about something that happened in the little wood across the road from me that I've walked in for 20 years now. Recently I've been catching up with some of your podcasts, and one mentioned a creature that was brindle in colour, and suddenly that gave me a flashback of something that happened at the end of last year, 2024. I walk this wood at least 5 times a year. It's small, houses backing on one side. It has a builder's merchant and a canal on the other side of it. There's a fishing lake on the other side of the canal, and it's at the edge of town, only about 10 minutes from the centre. There's a field with a wood at the end, and the path goes round the edge of the wood, but it could only take, less than 5 minutes to walk round it. It's full of ivy-covered trees and small bushes. I've seen homeless people in there in the past, even a guy who was selling stolen trainers. There were night fishermen occasionally in the summer. I know most of the other dog walkers, and on this day, I walked around the woods with my 2 dogs on the uphill path, which leads back into a field. There's another dog walker walked down the path towards me. One of my dogs can be a bit silly, and as we met her, my dog went off into the path, into the woods, only about 10 feet away. To keep an eye on him, I stepped off the path, walked over to him, and suddenly I realised it wasn't 2 dogs. There was my dog, her dog, and one other. It was directly below me, behind a log that was only a foot high. But it was enough that I wouldn't have seen it from the path. I say a dog, but I couldn't see its head, and it was down, and there was no tail to be seen either. It was a beautiful light brown colour, brindle markings. I would say it had the body similar to a French bulldog or a staffy, short, muscular, low to the ground, and it scurried away from me into the bushes. At the time, I just thought it was weird. And maybe, they have another dog with them, but I saw them later in the field and they only had the one dog. Since learning about this subject, I've always been looking for something human or ape-shape, so I've disregarded it at the time. I've seen some strange things in this wood, you know, a glimpse of a very lean, tall, dark figure reaching up into a tree one night. And another incident, I walked towards the woods at night and this large, dark mass just moved up the front of a tree. Another time, in midsummer, my dog indicated something was in a very large ivy-covered tree, which was very unusual as she'd never done that before. She would jump up at the tree and then come, to me and go back and jump up and then back to the tree and so on, back to me. As I stood there, wondering what was happening, a 2-foot long branch was thrown up in the canopy behind me into the only tree that didn't have ivy on it, and it rattled around the branches. What was strange was that it was the hottest day of the year. There was a group of what I presume were Eastern Europeans in their traditional summer dress. Quite a sight, not something I'd seen before or since. The girls were all wearing bright, colourful dresses of a style I didn't recognise, and while standing there confused, I realised this tree that my dog started jumping up at was right at the edge of the wood. It was thick with ivy and would have had a great view of these people. This has all happened over the last 10 years, because before that I had no idea that anything like this could exist. There have been times when he's felt watched and shadowed in those woodlands. You can hear something following him. You have that feeling that you're suddenly no longer alone. And when I was adding this report to the BBR case files map, I realised there were a couple of reports featuring that same kind of shadowing behaviour, all within walking distance of each other. A wandering, unknown creature could move between this area at ease. There are ample food and water sources, plenty of habitat. A fellow investigator, a good friend of mine, Glassy Gleamer, had an experience as a child, and later as an adult, at Ashridge Country Park that he shared with me. And that's within walking distance of the earlier report. And Glassy said, "Here's some of the information you asked for, Deb. It's about my first sighting. Honestly, it's been a difficult one to make. It describes some of my experiences in Ashbridge I had as a child before I was ever involved with this subject and knew what a WoodWose was. I spent many hours playing as a child, visiting over the years on the Ashbridge estate. Last year, when I visited, I had a distinct memory of an incident I'd pushed away. The area is owned and protected by the National Trust, and the walks there are beautiful. It's like walking back in time. I felt a feeling of dread when this happened, and even in later incidents I've felt the same. It's always been like that for me, and it's something I've been struggling with as long as I can remember. As a kid, I would call the image of the things I felt and knew the hairy, fairy, shadowy people. If I tried to see them in my mind's eye, I would see a kind of shadowy, hairy figure. I remember distinctly seeing their shadows, but never their faces. It was a feeling that would come over me suddenly, and I would know that they were in the trees and the bushes watching me. The feeling isn't ethereal or whisper, it's a very real feeling. It's a knowing rather than a seeing, if that makes sense. It's like eyes boring into you from the woods or the bushes. I was there Monday, 6th of July 2015. I was walking round Ashridge Woods in Herefordshire like I always do, when some odd things happened. I'm still trying to work it all out. I've ruled out all possibilities of what you would normally find in the woods, and I can't match this to any known creature. Also, when I'm in the woods, I had something small thrown at me, like a fir cone. Then I heard a low growling, and just felt like something was watching me constantly. I felt watched in this area before, and I've seen shadows, which, with the way my eyes are, I'm not worried about. But the last two have kind of scared me, if I'm honest. Glassy's been researching a case called the Three Counties Werewolf since I met him many years ago, and he's amassed a great deal of evidence, and his knowledge of ground movements as an investigator is vital for any UK cryptid investigator. Glassy has also kept his research and finds private. We chatted this week about some of the video evidence he's collected, and he said he's now ready to share some of it. So over the coming months, I'll share several videos with you on my channel. Glassy had his first experience with the unknown at Ashbridge, and there have been other events that have left him at times confused and at others incredibly threatened. He speaks about the sudden feeling that comes over him when he is instantly aware that he's not alone. No amount of looking into the dark of the woods reveals what stalks him fully, but he's caught glimpses of them
this general
over the
area.
years.
This has happened a few times when I've been to Ashbridge throughout my life, before I was even involved in this subject. I think one was around this area somewhere, one further down on the ridge. I mean, I used to come to Ashbridge very regularly, quite a lot, especially during my sort of teenage up into my early 20s. We'd come here quite a bit. It's very popular around here, Ashbridge. So what was this? I was sensing something here all that time. It wouldn't happen every time I come here. The odd time it would. A feeling of being surrounded. A feeling of eyes burning into you. You're looking into the shadows, into the dark areas. It's sort of a doomy. People who know about these creatures and have felt it, it's very a feeling, a dread feeling, maybe. It's not a good feeling. So when I was little, my dad used to say to me and my brother, "Come on, you couple of hairy fairies." And even though I couldn't see these things that are around me, on these occasions I felt them around me. I was probably with other people at the time, but I was very quick to pick up on it. I used to think of them as hairy fairy shadow people. I suppose when I was about, I don't know, 9, 10, my first inkling there was a thing called Bigfoot and Yeti was Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. I love stuff like that, you know, but I never heard of a WoodWose, and I never imagined them being in this country. I just wouldn't have thought of it. So, to me, these things were like nature, hairy fairy shadow people. That's what they were. When I saw them in my mind's eye, they were like hairy shadows. Although I didn't see them, I just felt them. You're always looking off into the shadows. But what put that in my head? Yeah, it used to be a bit of a joke. My dad calling us hairy fairies or whatever, and we used to laugh about it and call each other hairy fairies. But yeah, that's what they always were to me, hairy fairy shadow people. Yeah, the feeling is real. It's really oppressive, not oppressive, but you know, no doubt. It leaves you with no doubt. It's that strong a feeling. So this is roughly one of the areas I felt them in once. I was right down there. One of the other times I felt it. The eyes looking into the shadows. As you start looking, once you feel those eyes, where it might be coming from. And I was right down there. When we were little, this was a lot bigger. Yeah, we can run up and down through here. I mean, I'm thinking, we used to come here multiple times, we used to play here multiple times. We're not far from the Beddington Monument, so, you know, mums and kids ain't going to walk far. My mum and dad were probably up there having a picnic or something. Yeah, we'd run up and down through here. I put when this actually happened around when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I would say, about 6 or 7 years old, and I did a couple more laps, and I got drew down. I don't know why. I just went down there. I was running around, and then I got drew down into this area you can see behind you. So I come down here, and I can hear something moving about, and I see this, what I can describe as a darting around like a demented mouse, you know, jerky movement in and out of trees, flicking from one place to the other. It's just like a shadow, and it had like his hair was like a blooming a mop, all frizzed out and really sort of wild hair, and it was just a shadow. And I walked in a bit, I suppose a couple of metres. When I actually saw what was making the noise, although it was flicking in and out of trees, it was just a silhouette. I legged it back to my mum and dad, right? So, what actually happened is, about a year ago, I come back here and I saw that ditch, and that triggered this memory. I think it's a repressed memory. I'm convinced it happened now, because I could feel the fear, you know, like when I remembered it, going in there and then running out. Why did I think they were hairy, fairy shadow people if I never saw that? I didn't know anything about WoodWose. I didn't even know what a WoodWose was. All I knew was I saw that thing, but I must have repressed that because it was only when I come back here and saw that ditch about just over a year ago that this memory just come back like that. And I couldn't believe, I thought, how could you forget something like that? So it must have been a repressed memory. Maybe it's because I was so young and I was so scared. And I know I didn't mention it to mum and dad. I know I didn't. I'm going to say that is my first sighting encounter with one of these WoodWose things. I can.
I think it's clear, as Glassy is speaking, that there's still a lot of confusion left from that early event, and also with the way the memory was buried. I don't think it's a coincidence that he went on to have other experiences throughout his life, while this lay dormant and buried. On seeing the ditch, it triggered the memory, it made it release, and suddenly he was back there again, as if he was just a young boy, playing hide and seek in the trees and the shadows with his brother. There are other reported experiences that are very similar to Glasses and Owls all across the UK. I received a message from a gentleman who was visiting a woodland who experienced the same kind of thing that they did. This took place at another country manor house, which is quite similar to Bagridge Park. The Make Hill mansion looked like the toy village in comparison. I wonder what it is about the homes of the elite that seem to bring forth all manner of fiends. I was contacted by a listener to BBR, and he said, I'm 69 years old, and all of my life I've poached hares, pheasant, deer, etc. I've been out on the darkest windy nights on my own, and I've never felt fear like that. One really hot summer's day, I was up at the Rothschild estate at Ascot. I was walking along in a very good mood, when suddenly I was overcome with an awful feeling, and I was completely gripped by fear. Ahead of me, about 30 yards in front, there was something moving around in the woods. I could hear it, but I didn't recognise the sound of its tread or its movement. I found myself completely frozen to the spot. Couldn't take another step. I did not see what was moving around in there, but I felt it. A very, very malevolent and dark entity was in those woods with me. I realised if I went forward in its direction, I wouldn't be coming back. A few days later, I made myself go back, and the entity was gone. All I found was the odd Chinese water deerskin lying on top of a hawthorn hedge. It had no head, no hooves, just skin. And in all my years of going out in the countryside, I've never felt such fear. It sounds strange, I know, but it was so malevolent, so evil. It realised I was there and was just waiting for me to come ever closer. I was as sober as a judge and was just happy to be in there. I do know the Rothschilds are known for their occult connections. I felt, at the time, it was something very big and very powerful, with a strong mental presence. He must have been absolutely terrified. I know I would have been. You get used to hearing noises in the woodlands, especially when you spend a lot of time in there. And deer have a distinct tread, and they tend to stay away from humans, in all honesty. They'll have heard you as you've entered the wood and usually go stock still, or move off if they can quietly. In our next case, we hear from a chap called Tony, who had a similar experience with one of his long forgotten memories suddenly popping to the surface. Tony contacted me in August 2022. He was also on the grounds once owned by the elite. Bagridge Country Park was once part of the Earl of Dudley's landscape parkland. A large area of the park became one of the most productive collieries in the world. Little like Beulah. Tony said, "Hi Deborah, your report on the Bigfoot creature seen at Bagridge Country Park triggered a long lost memory for me of what I thought, back then, was a disturbed deer scampering away in the bushes. Now, knowing what I know about British cryptids, I'm recalling the event differently, and I'm not so sure it was a deer after all. This happened not too far from the now Bagridge Country Park, about half a mile, if that. Even then, when I thought it was a deer, it still creeped me out. I lived in the Straits estate, next door to the woods there, and back in the 80s and prior to that, the woods were frequented by kids, playing like myself, the local pot poachers and a few dog walkers. When I was an adult, I had a lurcher dog, and when we went out exercising, she'd sometimes catch a rabbit for the pot. I'd go all over Bagridge and beyond on my walks, and I'd take her, usually 3 times a week, early in the morning just before dawn. That day, the one that I want to tell you about, started out as normal. I went through Bagridge Woods, not seeing any rabbits. I decided to head further on towards the Womburn village area. I set off to a little woodland about half a mile away from the village. I crossed over the A449 Stourbridge Road onto Withymoor Lane, where there's a footpath, and that gently rose onto a plateau above Womburn. The footpath at the time was on the left-hand side, and it was a banked hedge at some points. It ran all along the way, several feet above the path. The right-hand side was lined with light mature oaks and trees, etc. The hedge, in places, could not be seen through. It was so thick, and the scrub was dense, and over the other side of the hedge was pasture land, so it was a really good place to look for rabbits. That morning, I was making my way along the path, when to the left over the hedge I heard a loud crashing sound, as if something was fleeing through the brushwood. I put it down to a deer fleeing after disturbing it. Well, that's what I told myself at the time. I went on up the pathway to the top, where the track joined the pasture field. I made a point of looking back down the side of the hedge that the crashing noise had come from, but I didn't see any deer or any other animals anywhere. So I carried on my way. My dog was off as normal, hunting. It was on the way back down the same footpath that I was creeped out by heavy footsteps on the other side of the hedge following me. Once I was aware of them, I realised that they stopped when I stopped, and they started as I set off again. The dog was up ahead of me, and didn't seem to notice anything unusual. She was just being normal, and sniffing, peeing, etc. I was instantly on my guard. As I had this feeling of dread come over me, which I think spooked me. I'm no tart dad when it comes to defending myself, but I could not see what this was. And when I stopped, there was no other sounds from the direction of the footsteps. I'd seen no other persons on my walk, so I was on alert. I decided to take the better side of caution and walked on, only to hear a grunting type of noise and the sound of those footsteps keeping up with me. I thought it's got to be a loose cow or a horse, but I could see nothing through the thick hedge above me. When I made it about halfway down the path, the hedging started to thin and the ground levels out, and I heard what sounded like a stamp or a thud, as if someone had landed after jumping over a gate or a hedge. This creeped me out even more, and I hurried to the end of the footpath, where it met the lane and lines of houses. I walked a couple of yards to the side of the hedge, where the noise came from, but I could still see nothing looking back up along the field. I shrugged off the negative feeling, and I carried on back homewards through Bagridge and put it out of my mind until I heard your report, Debs, all these years later. And then there was my encounter with the black shuck dog some time later, next to Woody Park, where you've marked a recent report of a Bigfoot sighting. It happened literally 15 feet to the right of Woody Park. Now, in Bagridge Country Park, there's an area known as the Ridge, and this area has a horseshoe-shaped path that follows the tree line in a half circle. The path's only a single file wide, with trees on both sides of it. On one side of the path falls down a hill, and the other side has a slight incline, and it's very quiet there. Very people use it, as it's off the beaten track. One morning, a lady and gentleman were walking their dogs on this path, as the dog isn't great with others. It's a place they've used often, and that morning, they did as normal, and yet they witnessed a strange creature at the halfway point on the path. It was about 9:30 a.m. as they were walking along. It was the gentleman in the couple that noticed a dark figure in the trees, around 30 feet away from him at first. He thought it was strange, as the figure seemed to be watching them from behind the tree. Then it had ducked back in behind the tree every time it was noticed. The man decided not to say anything to his wife, as he didn't want to alarm her. They continued to walk, but the figure stayed around the same pace as them and continued to try and remain hidden. It would duck in and out of the tree line as it watched them walk. After around 10 minutes had passed, the man's wife noticed he seemed anxious and asked what the matter was. He told her what he'd seen and pointed the figure out, and she eventually spotted it and also saw it ducking back in and out as if it was peeping at them from behind the trees. It was hiding behind them. Then their dog started barking and growling at the creature. The couple rushed off as best they could, with the dog now on the lead, and eventually reached the fork in the path, and they chose the one which would take them straight back to the car park. As the couple turned at the bottom of the path that leads out of the woods and onto open fields, they stopped to catch their breath. As they looked back from where they had come from, the creature had stepped out onto the open path. They both agreed it was stood upright and was very dark in colour and covered in hair. The wife said it was around 8 feet tall, but he said it was closer to 7 feet. And they went on to add, he didn't follow us any further. They got back in the car, and now they no longer walk their dog in that area anymore. Oh, a little ride away in the area known as Show Lane, another report come in from a listener who said, Deb, I'm not sure what I saw in early May of this year. It was 2020. I was running late for work, so so I decided to cut through the country lanes that run towards Kimber to pick up the A449 road a bit further down. I was down the back end of Lower Penn near Wolverhampton on a road called Showell Lane. It's a single track road with woods and fields on both sides. As you come to the bottom of the road, there's a few houses and a very old overgrown footpath, a bit of a right of access or something. It's set back about 50 feet from the road. And it was when I got to that point, I saw what I thought at first thought was a man in a hunting suit, or like a sniper suit thing. Well, like shaggy, hairy stuff you see with them. But this was orangey in colour, like a red setter dog, but lighter. And then I realised the sheer size and bulk of this thing, and I knew it couldn't be, but I initially thought it was, because this thing was at least 7 feet tall, was massively thick around the chest and shoulders, like an American footballer, with all of its pads on. I was quite a bit away from it, and it was sort of stepping back into the shade of the foliage, but it was scary. I'm a man of 6 foot, 22 stone, who's trained for many years, but I felt scared and small compared to this thing, so I just floored it, which I now regret. I've since, after doing a bit of research, found quite a few sightings around the Midlands and Shropshire areas of strange creatures, and now my fear has turned more into a need to understand what I saw that morning. I wonder if they all experienced the same creature, or a member of this creature's clan, if I dare say. I mean, we don't know, do we? But something's out there shadowing people through the woods. If you're a regular listener, you remember a podcast from just last week where I featured Steve Hedwick experience in Staffordshire. And one of the things Steve mentioned was an unusual thud or a thump, as if something really heavy dropped from the sky with a resounding slam. Steve is not the only person I've heard this from, and I have heard it myself on a couple of occasions when I've been in the woods. I received a report from a listener to this show who experienced exactly this. And they said, while I was out hiking in the Annandale Lake area in Cumbria, I had a weird experience that I hadn't thought of until I saw a video you did where a bushcrafter had a weird experience in Sussex. He explained about this something he couldn't see that crashed through the trees. On this trip to Annandale, I pitched my tent for the night. Camp was fine until I woke up, all of a sudden, after hearing a heavy thud sound. It sounded like something that was heavy moving around me. It sounded like it was checking me in my camp out. It wasn't too close, although I was half asleep at the time. I thought it was deer, so I just went back to sleep. But now, listening to the video, I realised that it didn't walk like a deer. It couldn't be a deer. The thudding footsteps are far too heavy. I don't know, but I just thought I'd share this with you. In August of 2015, a gentleman made a report, and actually made it into the newspapers, after his experience in Ofton Woods in an area in Suffolk. It was August of 2015, and he said, I'm normally out looking for big cats as a rule. I've worked in woodlands as a woodsman for years in the past, not now. I was in a wood that had signs of a big cat, and we'd cut a ride through there and copied it about 30 years previous. Anyway, a few days ago, I'd gone up there through the woods as normal, looking for signs of a big cat. I had that feeling come over me, very strongly, that I wasn't alone any longer. Now, I'm a big lad, pretty fearless. I just lost it. I was so scared. I can't explain why, but I just totally lost my nerves. I decided to head out of the woods quickly, and as I went along, I heard, as plain as day, a monkey go boop, boop. I turned, looked in the direction the noise was coming from, and as I did, I heard an almighty crashing, and I clearly saw a two-legged thing hurtling along through the woods. It was the blur of something about 80 feet from me, and it moved away. The thing that I was seeing had really big arms, and it used them to knock aside the trees as it went. All I can say is it was just like a chimp in colour, but more like a gorilla in its build. But the general shape, overall, was that of a man. It was around 5'7", 5'8" in height, with arms at least a third longer than mine. It moved like we move, not bow-legged like a chimp would. Now, after 3 days of wondering, I still feel very confused. I do believe in Bigfoot, WoodWose and shug monkeys, but seeing one is very surreal. It's like I saw it on a film, but it was real, right in front and to the right of me. I can't describe the feeling of seeing one. I'm really confused. Well, that's how it leaves you feeling when you've had an experience. Some people would be very grateful to see a cryptid creature or a creature of the unknown. Not everybody is. It can be really life changing for some, and I understand what that's like completely. These days, there's more information out there on British cryptids, and somebody corrected me the other day and said you shouldn't call it British Bigfoot. It should be known as the WoodWose. And that would be amazing if we could do that. But as I explained to him, if we polled the British public, probably 90% of them wouldn't know what a WoodWose was. All the years I've done in research, and I had to stumble across it. It's not something we taught, is it? We're not told in our schools about them. Most of the history we hear is post-Roman history, and there was a lot more history before that. The WoodWose has always been here in the UK. And regardless of which country you are in that makes up the part of the UK, there are names for these creatures. And within those countries, there are also regional names. But WoodWose is a very good way of describing them because that's what they are. A hairy man that lives in the wood and prefers to spend its time with nature than as human beings. The puzzle I have is the WoodWose also post-dates Roman history. In the 1200s, we were adding them into our churches, into carvings, into stately homes. There are wood carvings, stone statues. The very famous one that was carved in the 1400s at Ludham, and that shows the very first female wose. In oral history, they go back to the very first century. So I don't understand why it's not common knowledge in the UK. Unfortunately, it's not. I prefer the term the UK wild man because it kind of covers everything, doesn't it? And that's before we touch on the green man, which is a face that appears within the leaves that looks incredibly human. The WoodWose is a puzzle, and probably will remain one for many years to come. But I'd have a look for yourself. Just have a Google, see if there are any WoodWose carvings in your local area, and you can go and have a look at them. You'd be surprised how many there are. And they also appear in our tapestries and stained glass. And there is a particular beautiful stained glassed female WoodWose that is in the chapel of Corpus Christi at Cambridge College. Which brings me to the latest reports of what I would class as a British WoodWose. The witnesses in this case described and named it as a monkey, so that's why I refer to it next. Both of these reports went into the national newspapers and they took place just last year, the end of last year, 2024. Anthony Chittenden was cycling down Arbery Road around midnight with his friend when they both saw an ape-like creature that was quite a bit shorter than a normal man. It had very long arms and they were hairy. At first, he was standing up on his back legs by the side of the road, but then he dropped down onto all fours and ran into a field next to Meadows Community Centre. He said it was very strange. Anthony said, I don't really believe in the paranormal stuff, so my best guess at the time that it could be an escaped monkey from a private collection. Maybe it was a costume or a prank, but if it was very, very convincing. I do keep an eye out now, and my phone at the ready just in case I see it again. Now, University of Cambridge student Rosie Pettifer was left feeling scared by her encounter on December the 16th, 2024, so just within a couple of weeks of Anthony's sighting. And she said, I shit you not, I saw a massive monkey thing running on all fours into the trees near the skate park. I was walking home on Monday night after work, about 8 p.m, maybe a bit later. Now, there are 3 skate parks that surround Cambridge College, so I'm not really sure which one she means. But all of them are within 2 miles of each other, and the creatures were seen less than 3 weeks apart. So, as you can see, now the sightings are on such a level, they're amping up so much that people are starting to report them to the newspapers. I've had quite a few reports come in over the last couple of weeks, some strange things that have been seen by people. There's one chap contacted me from Delamere, so I've reached out to the other witnesses from Delamere, and I hope I put a podcast together on that for you. If there's an area that you'd like me to do, just drop it into the comments, and then that's what I'll do. I shall put some sighting reports together from around that area for you all. Well, that's all for this week, so I will be back at the same time on the same day with some more amazing content from the BBR case files. Make sure you don't miss us. And if you're not subscribed, now's the time to click that subscribe button. Until then, good night, everyone.